67,000 people dead. 2 years of relentless bombardment. A war that the entire world declared impossible to stop. Then, in the space of 18 days in October 2025, everything changed. One man accomplished what dozens of American presidents, hundreds of diplomats, and thousands of negotiations never could achieve. And today, some biblical scholars are claiming we may be witnessing the fulfillment of a 2,500-year-old prophecy. I'm about to reveal something that will shake your understanding of current events, because what happened in the Middle East in October 2025 isn't simply politics, it isn't simply diplomacy. According to certain ancient texts, this could be the beginning of something infinitely greater, and the implications are staggering. On October 8, 2025, at 11:17 p.m. Washington time, President Donald Trump published a message on Truth Social that shook the entire world. In just a few words, he announced the unthinkable. Israel and Hamas had just accepted the first phase of his peace plan for Gaza. After 731 days of devastating conflict, after more than 67,000 Palestinians and 2,100 Israelis had lost their lives, the war finally seemed to be reaching its end. But how is this possible? How did an agreement deemed impossible for 2 entire years suddenly materialize in just a few days? And why are certain theologians claiming that this event could correspond precisely to the prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27? To understand the magnitude of this historic moment, we must go back 3,000 years, because according to ancient texts, what is happening today was predicted with disturbing precision. In 537 BC, a prophet named Daniel, exiled in Babylon, received an extraordinary vision. In the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verse 27, he writes, "He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he will put an end to sacrifice and offering." Biblical scholars have debated for centuries about the meaning of this prophecy. But in 2025, something extraordinary happened. On October 5, 2025, theologian Robert Clifton Robinson published an analysis that shook the global evangelical community. He noted that Trump's peace plan, supported by numerous nations, corresponded exactly to the criteria of Daniel's prophecy. A covenant with many nations, exactly as predicted. The exact historical context: the Jewish people returned to their ancestral land, and an agreement negotiated by a Western leader to bring peace to Israel. But that's not all. The details become even more disturbing. On October 13, 2025, in Jerusalem, an unimaginable scene unfolded. President Trump entered the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, to thunderous applause. Before the standing Israeli lawmakers, he spoke words that still resonate today. This is not only the end of a war, it is the end of an era of terror and death, and the beginning of the era of faith, hope, and God. This is the beginning of a great deal of concord and lasting harmony for Israel and all the nations of what will soon be a truly magnificent region. James Longman, ABC News chief correspondent, present in the chamber, testified, "What struck me most today was the pure force of Donald Trump's personality. There aren't many men, not many leaders who can walk into the Knesset in Israel to such thunderous applause, such a warm welcome." But the day was far from over. Trump then flew to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where a historic signing ceremony awaited him. Alongside Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and leaders from around the world, Trump officially sealed the ceasefire agreement. In his speech, el-Sisi hailed Trump as a peacemaker, declaring that the agreement ends an atrocious chapter in the history of humanity and opens the door, inaugurating a new era of peace and stability in the Middle East. Trump himself made a stunning statement. "It took 3,000 years to get to this point. Can you believe it? And it's going to hold too. 3,000 years. Exactly the period that separates us from King David, who established Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Coincidence? Or something deeper? To understand why so many people see prophetic fulfillment in these events, we must examine the details of the agreement itself, and what we discover is absolutely fascinating. Trump's plan for Gaza includes 20 detailed points, but 3 elements have particularly caught the attention of biblical scholars. First, the agreement involves not 2 parties, but many nations, exactly as Daniel predicted. On October 1st, 2025, the White House released a document titled Global Support for President Trump's Bold Vision for Peace in Gaza. This document lists the foreign ministers of Qatar, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, all expressing their support for Trump's initiative. France, Germany, Russia, Spain, and the United Kingdom also expressed their support. Never in modern history have so many nations simultaneously supported a peace agreement involving Israel. It's literally a covenant with many, the exact words of Daniel 9:27. Second, the agreement provides for the creation of a peace council chaired by Trump himself to oversee the reconstruction of Gaza. This council would potentially include former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and other world leaders. An international governance structure overseeing the land of Israel, once again a troubling echo of ancient prophecies. Third, and perhaps most significantly, the agreement paves the way for a massive expansion of the Abraham Accords, the historic normalization treaties that Trump negotiated during his first term in 2020, the Abraham Accords. The name alone is loaded with biblical significance. In September 2020, Trump orchestrated the unthinkable. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan all normalized relations with Israel. For the first time in decades, Arab nations officially recognized Israel's right to exist and established full diplomatic relations. But in 2025, Trump isn't stopping there. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, revealed in June 2025 that up to 6 new countries could join the Abraham Accords. Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, all in negotiations. In May 2025, Trump even met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, a former al-Qaeda member, in a historic attempt to normalize relations between Israel and Syria. Saudi Arabia, the grand prize of regional diplomacy, is also at stake. Trump declared in October 2025, "I hope to see Saudi Arabia join, and I hope to see others follow. I think when Saudi Arabia joins, everybody will join." Imagine this moment. The Arab nations that fought Israel for nearly a century, that swore never to recognize its existence, now signing peace treaties. The geopolitical map of the Middle East, frozen in confrontation for generations, redrawing itself before our eyes. But wait, because what makes all this even more extraordinary is the timing. And I'm not simply talking about the year 2025, I'm talking about what happened just before these agreements became possible. June 2025, Israel and the United States conducted a devastating military strike against Iran's nuclear program. In a single night, Iran's nuclear facilities, developed over decades at a cost of billions of dollars, were reduced to ashes. It was an operation of extraordinary audacity that changed the balance of power in the region forever. Trump himself made the connection. During his speech to the Knesset in October 2025, he stated, "If Israel and the United States had not attacked Iran, the Gaza deal would not have materialized." He added that eliminating Iran's nuclear program paves the way for more Arab states to establish formal diplomatic ties with Israel. Here's what's fascinating. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 prophesy a great war involving a coalition of nations led by Gog from the land of Magog, whom many scholars identify as a reference to a northern power, potentially Russia or Persia, modern Iran. These chapters describe how this coalition will attack Israel, but will be miraculously defeated. In 2025, we saw Iran, Israel's primary military threat and the main sponsor of regional terrorism, significantly weakened. Hamas, backed by Iran, lost approximately 60,000 fighters according to Trump's estimates. Hezbollah in Lebanon, also backed by Iran, was decimated. And Iran's nuclear program itself was destroyed. Is this the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38:39, or a prelude to even greater events? But that's not all, because there's another element of this story that gives you goosebumps, and it concerns a man who nearly died in July 2024. On July 13th, 2024, at a rally in Pennsylvania, a bullet grazed Donald Trump's ear, missing his head by only a few millimeters. If the projectile had deviated by 2 centimeters, Trump would have died instantly. That image, Trump raising his fist, blood streaming down his face, shouting "Fight," became iconic. For many American evangelicals, that moment confirmed what they already believed. Trump was chosen by God for a specific purpose. Mike Huckabee, U.S. ambassador to Israel and former Arkansas governor, sent Trump a message in June 2025, telling him he had been spared by God to be the most consequential president in a century, perhaps ever. This belief isn't marginal. According to polls, approximately 80% of white American evangelicals voted for Trump in 2024, and many of them see his return to the presidency as prophetic fulfillment. Pastor John Hagee, founder and chairman of Christians United for Israel, which has 10 million members and presents itself as the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States, stated, "It is not possible to say, 'I believe in the Bible,' and not support Israel and the Jewish people." For Hagee and millions like him, supporting Israel isn't a political question, it's a biblical commandment. This vision is rooted in Genesis 12:3, where God tells Abraham, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse." Many evangelicals believe this promise applies not only to Abraham personally, but to his descendants, the Jewish people, and the modern nation of Israel. That's why, during his first term, Trump made a revolutionary decision that electrified the global evangelical community. He moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital. Jeanine Pirro, Fox News host, wrote that Trump, like King Cyrus before him, has fulfilled biblical prophecy. King Cyrus. Now there's a fascinating parallel. In 538 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon and immediately issued a decree allowing exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Isaiah 44:28 had prophesied 150 years earlier, "Who says of Cyrus, 'He is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please'? He will, who say of Jerusalem, 'Let it be rebuilt,' and of the temple, 'Let its foundation be laid.'" Could Trump be a modern Cyrus, a non-Jewish leader chosen by God to accomplish his plans for Israel? That's exactly what millions of evangelicals believe. But there's another aspect of this prophetic story that's even more disturbing, because according to Daniel 9:27, the covenant that will be confirmed with many nations will last 1 week, in biblical prophecy generally interpreted as 7 years. Here's where it gets really intriguing. Trump's peace plan for Gaza doesn't have a specific publicly announced duration, but during diplomatic discussions, the figure of 7 years has been mentioned repeatedly. If, and this is a big if, the final agreement specifies a 7-year period, then it would correspond with disturbing precision to Daniel's prophecy. Robert Clifton Robinson writes, "If the peace plan is not for 7 years, it cannot be Daniel's prophecy. But what if it is? If a 7-year agreement is announced between Israel and several nations, overseen by a Western power, then we might be witnessing the literal fulfillment of a 2,500-year-old prophecy." Now, I need to pause here and tell you something important. Biblical scholars fiercely debate these interpretations. Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, respected expert from Ariel Ministries, warns against what he calls newspaper exegesis, the tendency to read daily news and immediately speculate about prophetic fulfillment. Fruchtenbaum points out that according to Daniel 9:27, the covenant that triggers the tribulation period is specifically made between Israel and the Antichrist, not necessarily with a well-intentioned Western leader. He writes, "Biblical prophecy is never fulfilled approximately. It is always fulfilled exactly as written." This is a crucial point. We must exercise caution. We cannot declare with certainty that we're witnessing prophetic fulfillment until all the details match perfectly. But here's what we can say with certainty. Something extraordinary is happening in the Middle East, and whether or not you believe in prophetic fulfillment, the facts are undeniable. For the first time since the founding of modern Israel in 1948, we are witnessing widespread normalization of relations between Israel and the Arab world. The Abraham Accords, initially signed by 4 nations in 2020, could soon have up to 10 signatories. This is unprecedented in all of Middle Eastern history. For the first time in 2 years, Gaza knows silence. The bombardment has ceased. The 20 remaining Israeli hostages were released on October 13, 2025, a moment of indescribable joy for their families. Elkanah Bobot, held captive for 731 days, was welcomed by his tearful family in Mevaseret Zion. For the first time in decades, Iran, Israel's primary existential threat, has been significantly weakened. Its nuclear program is in ruins, its regional proxies are decimated, and Trump even left the door open to negotiations with Tehran, declaring in October 2025, "I'd love to lift sanctions when they're ready to talk." And for the first time in recent history, an American president has succeeded in uniting a massive global coalition, including nations that have traditionally opposed each other, around a common vision for the Middle East. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on October 13, 2025, "This is one of the most important days for world peace in 50 years. This is not an exaggeration." Trump, who was listening, immediately reacted with dissatisfaction, suggesting that Rubio was understating the importance of the moment. Is Trump right to be bold? Time will tell. But one thing is certain, we're living through a pivotal moment in Middle Eastern history. However, not all experts share Trump's optimism. Rob Geiss-Pinfold, professor of international security at King's College London, told CNBC, "Getting to a ceasefire was very, very important, but it's also the easy part." He points out that the difficult questions remain unanswered. Who will govern Gaza? How will it be rebuilt? Will international peacekeeping forces be deployed? And with what mandate? Diana Buttu, Palestinian lawyer and former advisor to Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, is even more skeptical. She argues that lasting peace requires accountability and reparations that I just don't see happening currently. She points out that Israel faces allegations of genocide before the International Court of Justice, and that Prime Minister Netanyahu has an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. And then there's the Palestinian question itself. Trump's plan doesn't provide for the creation of a Palestinian state, a two-state solution that the international community has long considered essential to lasting peace. Only 21% of Israelis believe their country and a Palestinian state could coexist peacefully, according to a recent Pew Research Center poll. The lowest percentage since the survey began asking the question in 2013. Ayman Odeh, an Arab member of the Knesset, was expelled from the chamber during Trump's speech on October 13, 2025, for holding up a sign saying, "Recognize Palestine." It was a brutal reminder that despite the cheers and celebrations, the central conflict remains unresolved. Trump himself was evasive on the one-state versus two-state question, stating on Air Force One, "A lot of people like the one-state solution. Some people like the two-state solution. I'm not going to weigh in on that right now. Here's the reality. What Trump has accomplished is extraordinary by any historical standard. Stopping a war that killed 68,000 people in 2 years, releasing 20 hostages held in horrific conditions, uniting dozens of nations behind a common peace plan. These are remarkable achievements. But transforming a fragile ceasefire into lasting peace, that's a challenge of an entirely different order of magnitude, and that's where the real work begins. Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, summarizes the dilemma well. You could say the initial phase of the initial phase is working, but serious disagreements remain between Israel and Hamas. He points out that crucial details still need to be settled: the timeline and extent of an Israeli withdrawal, the composition of post-war administration for the Gaza Strip, and the fate of Hamas itself. And then there's this stunning statement that Trump made while flying to the Middle East in October 2025. He hinted to journalists that Israel and the United States had given Hamas the green light to act as a Palestinian police force in Gaza for a period of time. They're staying because they want to stop problems, and they've been open about that, and we gave them approval for a period of time, Trump said. He added, "You have to understand that they lost probably 60,000 people. That's a lot of retribution, and those who are living now were, in many cases, very young when all this started. Hamas, designated a terrorist organization by the United States and the European Union, serving as police in Gaza. It's a proposition that shocked many analysts, but Trump insists it's temporary and pragmatic. We're monitoring that there's no major crime or some of the problems you have when you have areas like this that have been literally demolished. So, where does this lead us? What's the next step for the Middle East? And what should we watch for in the coming months? Here's what we know. Trump's plan includes several phases. The first phase, the ceasefire and release of hostages, is now complete. The second phase will involve Israeli withdrawal to agreed lines, the entry of massive humanitarian aid to Gaza, and the beginning of the reconstruction process. The third phase, and this is where it gets really interesting, involves creating Trump's Peace Council to oversee the long-term governance of Gaza. This council, chaired by Trump himself, would include world leaders and oversee what Trump calls a technocratic and apolitical Palestinian committee to administer Gaza. The fourth phase would potentially see the expansion of the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, and other nations. Steve Witkoff suggests that up to 6 countries could join, potentially Libya, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, although these last 2 nations already have diplomatic relations with Israel. And the final phase? Trump described it in grandiose terms during his speech in Sharm el-Sheikh. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East. He envisions a transformed region where the Abraham Accords he launched during his first term are expanded, where historic enmities are finally resolved, and where even Iran could potentially be integrated. All momentum is now towards a great, glorious, and lasting peace, Trump declared. But here's the million-dollar question. Is this really possible? Can we truly witness a fundamental transformation of the Middle East? Or is this just another false hope in a long history of false hopes? History makes us cautious. The Oslo peace process in the 1990s promised lasting peace and a Palestinian state. It resulted in the Intifada and decades of additional violence. The Camp David Accords in 2000 promised a final solution. They collapsed in bitter recriminations. The 2003 Roadmap for Peace promised a Palestinian state by 2005. We're in 2025, and there's still no Palestinian state. The Middle East is littered with failed peace agreements and broken promises. But here's what makes this moment different. For the first time, several Arab nations have normalized relations with Israel without a Palestinian state being created first. This was supposed to be impossible. The unified Arab position for decades was clear. No relations with Israel until the Palestinian question is resolved. The Abraham Accords shattered that paradigm. And now, with the Gaza ceasefire in place, Diplomatic space has opened for even greater normalization. For the first time, Iran, the primary sponsor of regional terrorism and opponent of any peace with Israel, has been significantly weakened. With its nuclear program destroyed and its proxies decimated, Iran can no longer effectively block regional peace efforts. For the first time, the United States has a president, in Trump, who seems genuinely committed to resolving this conflict in a personal way. Trump has devoted enormous political capital to this issue. His legacy depends on it. And unlike previous presidents who campaigned on Middle East peace, then focused on other priorities, Trump has made this his central objective. And for the first time, we have an unprecedented convergence of interests. Gulf nations want stability to pursue their ambitious economic development plans. Israel wants security and regional recognition. The United States wants to counterbalance China's influence in the region. And even the Palestinians, after 2 years of devastating suffering in Gaza, desperately want peace. All these factors create a window of opportunity, but windows close, and this one could close quickly if not seized. Here's what you need to watch for in the coming months. First, watch Saudi Arabia. If Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman normalizes relations with Israel, it will change everything. Saudi Arabia is the de facto leader of the Sunni Arab world. If Riyadh recognizes Israel, others will quickly follow. Trump has said repeatedly, when Saudi Arabia comes in, everybody comes in. But there's an obstacle. According to polls, 81% of Saudis view the prospect of normalizing relations with Israel negatively. Prince Mohammed will have to overcome massive public opposition. Can he do it? Will he do it? Second, watch Gaza itself. Will the ceasefire hold? Will Israeli forces withdraw to agreed lines? Will humanitarian aid effectively enter? On October 14, 2025, the Israeli military said it opened fire on several people who allegedly crossed what it called the yellow line, the withdrawal boundary. It's unclear how obvious this border is to residents. Gaza's Civil Protection Agency said families and rescue teams searching for their loved ones killed in Israeli bombardments and still under the rubble had to do so through arduous manual labor without access to heavy machinery and other digging tools. More than 10,000 bodies remain under the rubble, according to estimates. Reconstructing Gaza will require hundreds of billions of dollars and decades of work. Who will pay? How will governance be structured? These questions remain largely unanswered. Third, watch Israeli elections. Netanyahu faces corruption charges and an international arrest warrant. His governing coalition is fragile. If the government falls and new elections are held, it could radically change the dynamics of peace negotiations. Fourth, watch Iran. Tehran has been humiliated by the destruction of its nuclear program. Will the regime seek revenge? Or, as Trump suggests, will it come to the negotiating table? Trump stated, Iran needs to make a deal, and I hope they will. But the hawks in Tehran might have other ideas. And fifth, and this is perhaps most important, watch the details of the final agreement. Will it be structured for 7 years? Will it involve international supervision of Israeli land? Will it create a mechanism to resume sacrifices at the Temple Mount? These are the details that will determine whether we're truly witnessing prophetic fulfillment or simply impressive secular diplomacy. Now let me be clear about something. Whether or not you believe in biblical prophecies, whether you view Trump as a hero or a villain, one thing is undeniable. We're witnessing an extraordinary moment in human history. After 77 years of conflict since the founding of Israel in 1948, we're finally seeing a possible path to regional peace. It's not guaranteed. It could fail. But it's possible in a way it's never been before. And if you're a person of faith, you have to ask yourself, is God at work here? Are we witnessing the fulfillment of promises made millennia ago? The prophet Ezekiel wrote in chapter 37, verses 21 to 22, This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. In 1948, after 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people returned to their ancestral land and re-established a nation. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Jerusalem came back under Jewish control for the first time since 70 AD. In 2017, Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy there. In 2020, the Abraham Accords were signed. In 2025, a major ceasefire in Gaza was achieved, and dozens of nations support a comprehensive peace plan. Coincidences, or the deliberate unfolding of a divine plan? I can't answer that question for you. No one can with certainty, but here's what I can tell you. The events of recent months have been absolutely unprecedented, and they match prophetic patterns in a way that deserves at least to be taken seriously. Dr. Mark Hitchcock, Associate Professor of Biblical Theology and Exposition at Dallas Theological Seminary, writes, "We're living in a time when Israel is back in its land, Jerusalem is under Jewish control, and nations are turning toward Israel like never before. These are precisely the conditions that the prophets described for the last days." But Hitchcock also adds an important caution. We must be careful not to go beyond what Scripture actually says. Prophetic enthusiasm must never replace careful exegesis. That's wise. We must remain humble. We must acknowledge that we could be wrong. Previous generations believed they were living in the last days, and they were wrong. We could be wrong too. But here's what's different now. For the first time in history, all the preconditions for the fulfillment of end-times prophecies are simultaneously in place. Israel exists as a nation. Jerusalem is its capital. The world is focused on the Middle East. Nations are aligning exactly as predicted. Technology exists to accomplish prophecies that would have been impossible just decades ago. Does this mean we're in the last days? Not necessarily, but it does mean we're living in a unique time in human history. A time when the impossible becomes possible. A time when ancient prophecies and modern events converge in a way that demands our attention. So what do we do with all this? How should we live in light of these extraordinary events? First, stay informed. Don't just read the headlines. Dive deep into the details. Understand the complexities. The Middle East isn't a simple story with obvious good guys and bad guys. It's incredibly nuanced, with centuries of history, deep wounds, and legitimate grievances on all sides. Second, pray for peace. Whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or of another faith, or even without faith at all, we can all agree that peace is better than war. Millions of people have suffered in this conflict. Tens of thousands have died. If we now have a chance for lasting peace, we should all support it. Third, remain humble in your convictions. If you believe we're witnessing prophetic fulfillment, hold that belief with humility, acknowledging you could be wrong. If you're skeptical of prophetic interpretations, hold that skepticism with respect for those who see things differently. Fourth, focus on what truly matters. Amid all the debates about prophecy and geopolitics, let's never lose sight of the human element. Real people have lost their homes. Real families have buried their loved ones. Real communities have been torn apart. Any peace agreement must ultimately serve these people, not political agendas or theological belief systems. And fifth, watch carefully. Because whatever you believe about prophecies, one thing is certain. We're living history in the making. And what happens in the months and years ahead will shape the world for generations to come. Trump himself stated during his speech in Egypt, "This is not just a moment in history, this is a turning point in history." For once, his hyperbole might be justified. Because if this agreement holds, if the Abraham Accords expand to include Saudi Arabia and others, if Gaza is rebuilt and Palestinians find security and prosperity, If Israel and its Arab neighbors build normal relations, then we will have truly witnessed something extraordinary. Not just from a prophetic standpoint, but from a purely human standpoint. We will have witnessed the end of a conflict that the entire world considered unsolvable. We will have seen ancient enemies become partners. We will have been witnesses to the transformation of a region defined by war into a region defined by cooperation. Will this happen? I don't know. Nobody knows. But for the first time in a very long time, it seems at least possible. And if you ask me whether I think we're witnessing prophetic fulfillment, here's my honest answer. I don't know. But I'm watching very closely because the patterns are troubling, the coincidences are remarkable, and the timing is extraordinary. Daniel 12 verse 4 says, "But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge." That's fascinating. A prophecy about prophecy itself, that understanding will increase at the time of the end. Maybe we're in that time. Maybe we're witnessing the unfolding of plans established before the foundation of the world. Or maybe we're simply witnessing remarkable political events that by coincidence resemble ancient prophecies. Either way, this is a moment not to be missed, a moment to observe carefully, to consider deeply, and to never forget. Because moments like this, when history pivots, when the impossible becomes possible, when the world as we know it might be about to fundamentally change, these moments are rare. They come perhaps once or twice a century, and we have the privilege of living through one of them. So keep watching, keep learning, keep asking questions, because the story of the Middle East is far from over. In fact, if Trump and many others are right, it's only just beginning. And if you really want to understand where all this might lead, you need to know the complete story of biblical prophecies concerning Israel and the nations, because what we've covered today is only the beginning. There's so much more. Prophecies about the temple, about Jerusalem, about the surrounding nations, about the events that are supposed to precede the end of the age. In the next video, I'm going to reveal something even more extraordinary to you, something that could change your entire understanding not only of the Middle East, but of humanity's destiny itself. Because according to the scriptures, what's happening now in the Middle East isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the final chapter. And that final chapter, it's more epic, more dramatic, and more important than everything we've discussed today. Click on the screen now to discover what comes next. Because believe me, you don't want to miss that.